Welcome on behalf of Dallas College and the sustainability team. My name is Faye Davis, and I am joined by my team members Sonia Ford and Lori Dela Cruz Lewis, who are working in the background. We are also grateful for the support of our Dallas College WebEx support team. Today's session is with Michael Mendoza, Blown Away How Texas Leads the Nation in Wind Power and Wind Energy Research. Michael Mendoza serves as the Assistant Director for the Wind Energy Center at UT Dallas. Previously, he managed the Office of Sustainability at the University of Houston for 3 years. Mr. Mendoza has a master's degree in higher education administration from the University of Houston and a bachelor's degree in history from the University of North Florida. He worked for a decade in the restaurant industry in Florida and Texas before starting in education. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us. Please feel free to get started whenever you're ready.
Great, Faye. Thank you so much. Yes, hello, everyone. I'd like to talk about wind power in Texas, and there might be some things that you find interesting. So first, start just in general about renewable energy growth in the United States over time. We can see that it's had a pretty sharp rise here in the past few years, with 2020 being a record-setting year for wind energy in general, and we can see 2021 solar starting to catch up. That's to be expected. There's a limited land area that can support wind energy, and there's much more for solar. So we imagine at some point wind energy is going to sort of level off while solar will continue to rise. And just for comparison, this is the total United States looking at the mix. We are still very reliant on natural gas and not so much coal, but we can see that renewables are nearly a quarter of the generation capacity for the entire United States, which is good in my opinion. You can see here, these were the projects that were completed in 2021. All of the blue dots representing wind, and you can see the spatter of yellow. Again, I mentioned that land capacity because we know that the wind blows very reliably here in the center of the country, and that's where we'll see clusters of wind farms. And if we look at what is coming, we can see that there's still more growth in all renewables, and specifically here in the Northeast where we're working on offshore wind. That is rapidly accelerating, and that's a technology that is still being developed, and I'll get to that a little bit later. In terms of consumption, this is another graph over time that just shows that hydroelectric and biomass were dominant until the past, 20 years, and wind energy here just surpassed hydroelectric power in 2020. Now, looking at the installed capacity across the United States, you can see here's Texas with 33,000 megawatts. That's roughly 6.5 million homes that can power, if you're considering the peak demand for it. And you can see that, again, the states here in the middle have the majority of the capacity. If we look at the potential for future wind energy, there's still 1.3 million megawatts available in Texas. And just for perspective, that's 250 million homes that Texas alone could power. So we're still rapidly accelerating wind and wind development here in Texas specifically. Just in case anyone isn't aware, what makes Texas unique is there's sort of 3 main energy grids that are interconnected across the United States: the Western, the Eastern, and then Texas. So that's going to factor in a little bit later when I start talking about policy and how the growth of wind energy really exploded here, specifically because of some of these factors. And if we look at the Texas energy grid specifically, I mentioned there's 33,000 megawatts of wind, and our peak demand recorded here is around 74,000. And you can see just the mix of Texas alone, again, still very reliant on natural gas, but a quarter of our energy is wind as well. So again, hopefully we begin to see those ratios go a lot more towards wind and solar as future projects come online. One of the things that's really interesting is there is more wind power in Texas than the next 3 states combined. 27% of the total wind energy in the United States was produced right here in Texas. And I know we love doing this fact, but if Texas was its own country, we'd be number 5 in the world just in wind energy production. So that's pretty interesting. What makes it so good? What makes wind so good here is one, just geography. You know, if we look at this map here, these purple, red, and orange areas are all great areas for wind. It's where it blows at a steady enough speed, in a steady enough time with the right speed to generate the wind power. We're also very supportive of wind energy companies here. You can see the number of manufacturing facilities, as well as some of the savings from the investment in these facilities. Now, some of this data is a little bit dated. There's definitely more jobs than the 24,000. So I'll just kind of have a little caveat there that some of this may be a little bit dated. So one of the things that really helped Texas to dominate is in 1999, they had this standard, portfolio standard, where we needed to have more renewable energy into the grid. They set some goals of 10,000 megawatts by 2025, and that goal was surpassed in 2010. It only took them 10 years to reach a 25-year goal that they had set. And I'm highlighting here a couple of municipalities that have wind ordinances as a result of this law. Again, helping foster an environment where wind energy would be able to develop. Another thing is in 2005, the Senate Bill 20 had these renewable energy zones, and they created these transmission lines, these high capacity transmission lines, knowing that with Texas's geography, there would be a lot of wind development in places that might not have had an interconnection before. This is particularly important with the grids that I mentioned earlier, with the Western Interconnect and the Eastern Interconnect. Because none of these lines had to cross a state line, it was much easier for regulatory bodies to approve them, for the construction to get underway, and then them ultimately get switched on, because it was all kept within Texas, within the Texas grid. And then in 2015, this is what's interesting, is nationwide there was a tax credit for wind, and it ended in 2020. So remember, I mentioned that 2020 was a record year of wind installations. It's because everyone was trying to get their wind projects underway before this tax credit had expired. And as a result from all of these activities, this is a fairly common sight across rural Texas. One of the other things I want to talk about is what we call the levelized cost of energy. This is the estimated revenue that is required to recover from a project, usually after 25 years of operation. So one of the things that our research does is help to bring down this levelized cost. And you can see here that solar and wind are actually cheaper than fossil fuels. And the only outliers are these kind of orange or golden dots here. And that's because those are decommissioned plants that are still operating. So they've already made up that 25-year cycle. And it's also the cost of salvaging those. So yeah, new developments for wind and solar, and this little dot here is offshore wind, and that's rapidly coming down. So you can see the cost to develop a new wind farm and other renewables is much cheaper than traditional fossil fuels. Again, this is wind specifically over time, that levelized cost. You can see we had a little dip here, then it leveled off, but then it's been coming down pretty steadily within the past decade. Again, helping to drive those new wind projects, specifically here in Texas. One of the other ways we measure the cost is not only the direct dollar amount, but the value that it provides. So how do we get grid stability, personal health, and climate health, from these renewable projects? are part of the benefit that comes from the cost of these projects. And just to compare, this is a map of actual wind farms in the top 4 states that I mentioned earlier. It's Texas and Oklahoma, Iowa, and Kansas. Just in case you wanted to get an idea geographically of where wind farms actually are, you can see their little icons here. So that, again, the heartland of America begins to look a lot more like this, and these scenes become more and more common. So that leads me to the work that we do. Again, I mentioned that well, I'm not sure I mentioned this, but we have a wind energy research center at the University of Texas at Dallas. And a little timeline and history is in 2014, we developed a partnership with UMass Lowell to create a National Science Foundation Wind Energy Center. It is the only NSF industry university center that's funded for wind energy. We're the only one. So as a result, we had some investments made on campus to develop and build a wind tunnel, and that tunnel opened in July of 18. We've also received some other major awards for projects that focus on novel wind turbine designs and new technologies for offshore wind. And then here in 2019, our official Center for Wind Energy at UT Dallas was formed. The vision is we really want to look at transformational research that lowers that levelized cost of energy, but also has new designs and ideas for a wind farm layouts. We're also trying to establish partnerships. I mentioned that industry-university partnership. So we're always looking for companies that are interested in doing research with us. We have a membership structure where they can join and help to fund the research. And then as a result, they get to share in all of the technologies that are developed from that research, which is great for them and for us. Some of the research areas that we work in, again, I mentioned blade design. So thinking about how to make more resilient and sustainable blades. One of the things that we hear a lot from our member companies is there's not a great end-of-life sustainability plan for some of the blades. So that's a topic we're pursuing. These control systems help to steer wind turbines so that they can optimize power output. For modeling and measuring, I mentioned we have a wind tunnel here on campus. They're able to take measurements out in the field using a LiDAR, a mobile LiDAR, and then come back in the lab and recreate those conditions and do all types of modeling. Energy storage is something that's been pretty interesting lately. There's a lot of those projects that you saw in that bubble map are becoming more and more hybrid. So it's not just wind and solar together, but it may be wind and batteries or solar and some kind of storage. So we do research on that as well. With foundations and towers, there's always a need for new materials that could be lighter or stronger to help decrease the cost and the loads on some of these structures. I mean, wind turbines are quite massive. Inspection repair is, ongoing maintenance. So sometimes there's, dust or debris that can accumulate on the blades. So we work on different ways using either sensors or even drone technology to monitor the blades without having to have somebody climb up on the tower to reduce that safety risk. And then again, I mentioned some novel concepts we're working on, like wind turbine blades that could even collapse in high wind to prevent damage. That's just one example that I think is fascinating. Here we've got a pretty good research team that's very diverse in their expertise, and this team is growing. We're having more researchers come to the institution specifically for wind energy to help us forward our mission. And then this is that industry-university partnership I had mentioned. Here's some of the companies that are part of our center. They're OEMs and repair and owner operators. All levels of the wind industry are a part of our center. That's why it's pretty attractive for new members to join. Because they get access to a great community of companies and share in that technology and research. This is one of the projects I mentioned earlier with that timeline. It's another major award that we got with one of our member companies. They're looking at trying to influence the way a blade turns in the wind so that you can get a power boost whenever there's lower wind. Wind turbines have a power curve where at lower speeds it builds up until eventually it flattens out as the wind reaches a certain speed. So they're trying to move that speed to a lower and lower number so that you get maximum power even in lower winds, which I think is fascinating. And then here's another major project that we received funding for that we're looking at, again, novel turbine blade designs and even wind farm designs specifically for offshore, not just on the East Coast, like you saw on the map, but we're looking here in the Gulf of Mexico, trying to make more resilient structures, knowing that it's a hurricane-prone area. So we're designing for resiliency here. So here's some of the tools that we get to use. I mentioned the mobile LiDAR station. They take a van out to the wind field, take all of these measurements for the wind, and bring that back to the lab, and they can recreate those conditions in the campus wind tunnel that you see there. It's actually pretty cool that the tunnel is about 100 feet long. So what they're able to do is build miniature structures to kind of recreate the landscape that they measured. This is, foam blocks or even wooden blocks to represent, rolling hills or trees or obstructions. And then they'll turn the turbine, the wind tunnel on to measure the turbine's performance. So I think that's pretty fascinating. And this is just since 2020, they're pretty prolific researchers. We've got a lot of publications here, conference papers, and even some patents, as well as I wanted to highlight here, we have about 30 graduate students that are currently working within our center on projects. And here's an example of some of the measuring they do. So, please. So you can see here, this is inside the wind tunnel. They have a testing turbine. And what they're looking for is these vortexes that are going to follow a flow off the edge of the blade here. And they're measuring downstream how far that they go so we can see the downstream interference. Slow it down, pretty neat, huh? The reason they're doing this is we know that in a wind farm, there's turbines on the front lines that are going to be receiving most of the wind, the majority of the wind, and they're going to be putting out maximum power, but there might be towers behind them that are getting caught in these turbulent flows. So by understanding how the turbulent flows form, we can think about how to redesign a new wind farm, not having wind turbines getting stuck in another one's wake, which would reduce power. Okay. And then because we are a university, we're very focused on educating. So you can see we've got a lot of courses here listed in several different areas. They're mostly graduate courses. We do some undergraduate work, but a lot of what we do focuses on graduate work. And you can see in the picture on the right here, this would be an example of a project a student would be working on. So they're modeling the downstream flows here, just using the LiDAR measurements at the bottom. And then this kind of yellow swirly thing is their high fidelity model that they're using to measure the wind. And some of the future things we're working on. So there's a big push for ocean safety, specifically in the Gulf of Mexico. So we're a part of this Safety Institute, looking at how not only we build resilient structures, but we're also looking at biocompatible structures. So monitoring the health of the sea life around us, and preparing for potential disasters that can occur. And here on this Texas offshore map here, you can see all of this is potential for offshore wind development. And because it's in that sweet spot of wind speed, it's very attractive for new offshore wind developments. And again, I mentioned that sustainability of blades. It's a problem we're definitely trying to solve, thinking about new types of composite materials, thinking about new ways of repurposing old blades, and being more sustainable as these blades come to their end of life. So again, this is our Wind Energy Center. We're clearly generating a lot of research and publishing papers. We're delivering technology to our member companies that helps increase their power outputs, lowers their cost, and provides optimal systems for them. And we're training new students that will potentially work for some of these member companies or go out into the industry in some other capacity. And again, I mentioned those partnerships that we're always trying to form. So I think I'm doing good on time. I'll go ahead and say, why are we doing this, and what does it matter to anyone watching this? Well, if you're not familiar, here's the UN Sustainability Development Goals. It's just a blueprint for or how we can be more sustainable globally. I won't dwell too much on this because most of us are familiar. But here's the key thing that I want to mention is the reason why sustainability and climate change are so important is it doesn't matter if it's directly influencing climate or indirectly influencing climate. Because the world that we live in is complex, there's this interconnectivity of everything that touches our lives. So if there's any failure in any one area, it's going to impact the others, whether it's climate related or not. And humans are clearly impacting the environment. If you look here, these are all of the natural factors impacting temperature, and you can see it's fairly stable. And here's all of the human generated factors impacting temperature, and it's not stable. And when you combine them, you can see that temperature is rising. And as a result, this is Hurricane Harvey, which I was living in Houston at the time. So I'm no stranger to the impacts of climate and a warming globe. There is a demand for sustainability experts. These could be sustainability generalists, which I would consider myself to be. We typically work on policy or education collaborative efforts to try to either increase awareness or get some sort of structures in place that support sustainability efforts. Or I would consider our researchers sustainability specialists. They're very focused in one field. They're helping to develop new ideas and inform, those policy experts or whoever the case may be that is needing their expertise. And some of the key developments that we need to get to have a more sustainable world is obviously everyone talks a lot about net zero, having a zero carbon footprint, but that's only half of the battle. Even when we get to net zero, there's still going to be an impact on the temperature from emissions. So we have to start thinking about net positive. And there's companies that are doing this, direct air capture from the atmosphere or other ways that they're trying to remove emissions from the atmosphere. And then ultimately, what we would like to get to is a complete closed circular system so that any resources that are being developed and used are then recycled or reused, whether that's through advanced materials or through other processes where the emissions are captured. So that's where we're ultimately heading. And then finally, what is the future and how is it going to impact you, and what are ways that you can work on things? One is this idea of blockchain. So this is not cryptocurrency, it's not Bitcoin. Specifically in energy markets, there's a practice where pricing is based on fluctuating markets, and it's not always efficient. So what blockchain allows us to do is have real-time energy pricing at any moment. That's going to impact you when you go to pay your electric bill because it's not someone just looking at your usage over the month and then taking a snapshot and pricing it to whatever it is at that time. Instead, you can real time price out your energy usage. And then I mentioned that circular economy. So we definitely need advanced materials that can be more easily repurposed or broken down in ways that don't release emissions or impact wildlife. And those sustainable development goals, I think, are going to become business strategy. It's not enough for companies to commit or make broad sweeping statements about their sustainability efforts. I think in the future it's going to be much more embedded in their business plan and business manifesto, because there's an impact that companies are having that they're not being held accountable for. And then water. I mean, we're looking in the West Coast right now. There's a huge issue with water shortages. So I think in the future there's going to be a way that we can have a more water security. And then clean energy is growing up already. I mean, you saw all those projects that are being developed across the country. So I think that as we move further along and we get more and more capacity from these clean energy generators, that there's going to be a lot more leverage that they'll have in the future. And then here's investments that I think is fascinating. You know, if a project is going to get funded, or if a new company or startup is going to get funding, then they're going to need to be able to demonstrate their environmental impacts, and not just, again, in broad sweeping ways, but in concrete examples of how they're mitigating their impact. And then this is something that I don't have an opinion on, but I'll just mention, you know, there are companies that are like Nestle that are, you know, taking resources from areas of the country that might not be as privileged as us, and they're not reinvesting in those communities. So there needs to be a policy where these companies are being held accountable for where they're operating. And then we saw this during the pandemic. You know, transportation and stay-at-home work has been revolutionized. You know, there's plenty of people who found out how easy it was to transition from work to a work from home, and we literally measured the impact of not as many cars on the road. It is a measured impact. So I think that's something that's already shifting. And I love this one. The communication through memes is firmly embedded in our culture, as it were. So I think using memes as a vehicle to convey sustainability, I think is a great prospect. And then lastly, it's not just sustainability and resiliency, but it's the careful planning and recognition of all of those interconnected webs that's really going to lead us into a sustainable future. So I know I talked a lot about wind energy. I also talked a lot about sustainability. But thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was extremely informative, and you have quite a few questions. So
okay, great.
Let's go ahead and get started so we can get through all of them. So the first question is, what does the job market look like for wind renewable energy careers over the next decade? Is it rising? Is it staying the same?
It's a great question. It's absolutely rising. Not only because we're getting more renewable energy projects that are being developed, but there's a need for technicians or specialized individuals that can service these areas, specifically wind turbines. I'll speak to that just because I know a little bit more about it. But yeah, so it's definitely rising. It's a good time if you're interested in studying about renewable energy or a support system for renewable energy industries, because that's definitely a career that is going to continue to be in demand.
And this one kind of piggybacks off of that. Is there a need for turbine technicians? Is it It's kind of a three-part question. Is it a dangerous job? How much training do you need? And what does the salary look like for that?
I can tell you that one, the salary is very good. You will have a comfortable life. I don't know what it is specifically. In terms of training, yeah, it doesn't hurt if you have a little bit of training that you can take. There's courses. We're developing some coursework here at UT Dallas that hopefully we can get certificates to go out. Our center's only been around really for 2 years officially, so hopefully as time goes on, we'll get more of these training opportunities. Is it dangerous? No, no more than any other physical job where you have to be around large equipment or at a great height. There's plenty of safety protocols that you have to follow when you're climbing a wind tower. But what I can tell you is it's not just people climbing towers. I mentioned there's drone inspections. So having a droning license is a valuable asset, not just for wind turbines, but even for solar farms. Being able to sweep an area and visually inspect using a drone is something that would be in demand as well.
Thank you. All right. The next question is, how much can one turbine power?
That's a good question. So turbines come in various sizes. They usually measured by megawatts. That's how much megawatts they can produce. So the smallest ones are about 1.5. The standard, the most used ones, is in the 5 to 8 range on onshore. But they're offshore, they can be much larger. So you can have a 25 megawatt offshore wind turbine. And in terms of how many houses that can power, it is roughly 250 to 300 per megawatt. So let's say if it's a 20 megawatt offshore tower, that's, what is that, 5,000 to 6,000 homes?
And that's just for one tower?
That's just one
Or
tower, correct.
wow, I did not know that. So follow up on that. So when driving through Texas, I see, just in one field, you'll see several of those. So what that energy is being used to power just whole cities, is that correct?
So it depends. The way the energy is offloaded is it's put into the grid, and it either has a direct buyer or it has like a collective buyer. So if it's a direct buyer, this would be like a utility company that is connected directly to where the wind is putting the power into, and then the utility company is buying it from the wind farm and then selling it back to you. Um, then there's sort of indirect buyers. These are people that have agreements with the wind turbine to pay them a set amount of money for just pumping energy into the grid, but they're not necessarily connected directly to that wind farm. So those are kind of the ways that it works.
I see. Okay. I hate puns, so I'm sorry, but I'm like really blown away by all the information you're giving. Yeah, I don't know why the whole world is not using this power right now. So, okay, next question. Is research being done to develop recycling for the turbine blades?
Yes, that's a really good question. We are actively doing this now. One of our experts, faculty, is in material science and composite materials. So we do have projects where we're looking at different combinations of materials, different ways of using chemical processes so that the blades are either biodegradable, so they're much more friendly to the environment, um, or or being recycled. Um, I think one of the ways that we can potentially explore options is there's plastics that's used inside of wind turbines, and plastics are very easily recyclable. So they're looking at different processes of combining the composites in different ways that can be more recyclable. So yes, we are actively doing this.
Okay. And a follow-up to that, how long do the blades usually last? Like, what is their lifeline?
Good question. Typically, with 25 years is the lifespan of any of these projects. What I can tell you is, they do have blade failure sometimes. So one of the things that happens is because they're so large is there can be vibrations from, you know, things coming a little bit loose um, or from the machinery itself just wearing, and these vibrations can ultimately lead to failure. I can tell you that yes, it has happened. Blades have literally shot out into the air. That does happen, but it's not that often. Again, a lot of the monitoring that I mentioned that we do research for is to prevent these kinds of things. They're looking at the bearings and the gears inside the machines to make sure that they stay healthy. And they're also, again, monitoring those vibrations and the surface of the blades to make sure that there's no compromises.
I see. Thank you. Next question. So, how do GIS and wind turbines siting work together?
That's a great question. So I know I can't say completely because I'm not fully aware. But what I do know is that GIS is great at using in combination with surveying. So when they're trying to do a new wind farm development, they'll survey an area and then use the GIS to plot out how they're going to develop the wind farm. And then what they do is they bring in that wind modeling that we talked about in the laboratory space, where they'll look at the survey, look at the GIS, and then look at the wind models and use that in planning for where to place turbines. That's the only thing I know as an direct example, but I'm sure there are more applications.
I see. Thank you. Um, uh, Gosh, yeah, you're getting a lot of questions, so let's
It's okay. It's
let's keep
okay.
going. Okay,
That's,
good,
that's
good,
I kept it short, so I probably talked too
good,
fast
good.
during the presentation anyway.
No, you're good. Okay, another one about career. So, in what region of the state or country are technicians needed? So, where's the greatest need?
Well, here, let's see. I can go back some slides here. Um, let's see. I'll show you that map where they're developing projects. So here you can see, all of these blue dots are wind farms. So these would be areas where there would be a need for technicians. Again, here in Texas, it's kind of in the heartland here, in Oklahoma as well, here in Nebraska. And then if we look at the future projects, again, it's kind of these same areas. They do tend to be in more rural areas, but that doesn't mean that there aren't larger cities, at least nearby, where if you're somewhat suburban but can still drive out to a rural area. Um, and then, of course, I mentioned the offshore wind. So along the northeast coast here is a place where we're going to be looking for a more specialized technician specifically for offshore areas.
I see. Thank you. Yeah, I was actually just wondering that how do places like New York, or giant, huge cities like that, how do they utilize? So they use offshore wind farms.
That's correct. And so offshore wind has actually been around for a long time. In Europe specifically, it's a very mature technology there. The United Kingdom is probably the one place in the world that has the most offshore wind development. Um, so it is a technology that has been around for a while. However, when we're applying it here, there's some difficulties that we have to face because of the different geography, the different climate. I mentioned especially down in the Gulf Coast that we have hurricanes. So that's where our research is being focused on solving problems that the European offshore wind might not have had.
Perfect. And just another question about this. So as the cost of offshore wind goes down and more companies invest in it, do you think that will help address the intermittency issue? Or will it still be difficult to move renewable energy where it is needed, when it is needed?
This is a really great question about intermittency. So It's yes, as there's more capacity to make energy, yes, that's absolutely going to solve the problem. I mean, I mentioned here in Texas, just onshore wind alone, there's 1.3 million megawatts of capacity. So they would be overproducing. There would be more wind energy than we would need. And in terms of the offshore wind, a lot more of what we're looking at for those types of development would be hybrid projects. So it would not just be wind turbine, there would also be some kind of energy storage. And the idea here is if there is any intermittency, the storage would be able to handle the load at least for a period of time until we're either able to reroute from a different source or get that wind farm back online.
See, thank you. Um, Do you where do you see wind energy going like in the future? Will these turbines ever become obsolete or is there much innovation that can go beyond this point that we're at now?
No, that's a good question too. I don't think that the wind turbines will ever be obsolete. I do think that we have a pretty refined design with the three blade design. Let's go look at these three blade designs. This is already a pretty refined design, but that doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement. I mentioned one of the things that we're trying to do is alter the surface of a blade so that it can produce in lower speeds. Even though the design is mature for the wind speed that we currently have it rated for, there's still innovation to be had. And then there's also novel blade designs, new ideas. I mentioned that what if you can have a wind turbine that instead of being stiff and rigid, whenever a hurricane comes, it actually collapses and folds on itself like a palm tree. I mean, this is something that is not a technology that exists. So yeah, there's absolutely room to innovate. They're constantly making them more efficient. Efficiency is another area where we can see some growth. You can have the same size turbine producing 10% more power. That's other ways that we're conducting research.
Thank you. And this next question actually kind of goes in with that. You showed a really cool turbine design. It looked kind of like a leaf. Do you think a different design would mitigate some of the pushback on offshore wind?
Um, I'm not entirely sure. I don't think, there's already different offshore designs that are, um, being tested. So here, I'll show you if you can see here. These are new ideas that we're testing. This one specifically for offshore wind. So, I'm not sure where the pushback would be coming from for how the blade is designed. Offshore wind is the way that we're developing it is meant to be, again, eco-friendly. It's meant to be adaptive and resilient. And we're even looking at ways that maybe even offshore structures could help with climate, help mitigate the impacts from say a hurricane.
Thank you. So how does the U.S. or I don't know if you know, how does the U.S. stand? Like, where do we rank with using with wind energy use?
um, there are definitely other countries that have been doing wind a little bit longer or a little bit faster than we have. I don't have any figure to say what number we were, but I can tell you we're not leading, but we're definitely not at the bottom. So I'm sorry that's a terrible answer, but I don't know. I do know there are more countries that have, uh, and that's relative. You have to think about the demand for how much energy is used in the United States. I mean, I'll go back here to um, my figure here for the United States. I mean, over 1 million megawatts total for the whole United States. I mean, there are some countries that wouldn't even come close to that, but their energy comes mostly from wind energy. So you kind of have to factor that in as well.
Thank you. And Does this have an impact on, have you seen or heard of any impact this has on tourism? In my head, I would think, I would love to go, drive past a wind energy farm to wherever I'm going. But I know there has been some criticism of this on, the way it looks and the impact on tourism. Have you ever, had any criticism of that?
I'm completely unaware of any of these impacts. I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm saying I really don't know. I don't have any information on it in front of me. So the only thing I could really do is speculate and guess, and I won't do that.
Good. Someone's also asking, does it have an impact on groundwater, the turbine?
Gotcha. To my knowledge, no. We have looked at some of the bio impacts from wind turbines, and I don't think I've come across anything that specifically mentions any negative impacts to groundwater. So no, not to my knowledge.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, that kind of concludes the question part. If anybody else has a question, please feel free to keep putting them in the chat. We still have a little bit more time with what can we do to help support wind energy? Like how, as consumers, is there anything that we can do as individuals to help support this?
Not directly. I mean, what I can say is if there's any sort of policy that is being proposed that may be detrimental to the wind energy industry, then by all means get involved, by voting or however you need to participate that way. Otherwise, I would say, consider, because because Texas is a fairly open market when it comes to deciding who your energy provider is. You could shop around for a utility provider that specifically mentions wind energy in their portfolio, and you can then switch over to using that company. That's something I've done in the past with solar, but I know that there's plenty of companies out there that are tied into the wind energy. So yeah, consider where your utility bill comes from.
Wonderful, thank you. And there is one last minute question. So, does it make a difference when we purchase electricity from Green Mountain Energy versus Reliant?
Gotcha. So it does not make a difference. They're both, the way that they buy and sell energy is fairly similar. I would say that, again, when you're looking at these energy plans and they talk about just buying renewable energy credits, that's something you want to avoid. What you want to look for is that they're actually sourcing from a renewable source. This would mean they have a partnership with a wind farm or a solar farm that they're connected to, and that they're buying that energy directly. So yeah, renewable energy credits specifically is what you want to avoid, because that's where they're just paying, they're quote unquote buying the clean energy, but it's in no way connected directly to your home. And there is one more thing I wanted to say. So any undergraduates that may be interested, this summer we're going to be hosting a research experience. So I'm building the website right now, but I should announce it hopefully by the end of this week, where you can apply for a 10-week program, and you'll get paid to come here, participate in research on campus, other activities that get you connected, not just with faculty, but also industry partners. So yeah, stay tuned. Hopefully, check our website. I'll go back to my title page. It's win.utdallas.edu. Feel free to keep monitoring our website for that announcement.
Wonderful, thank you. Is there anything our students have to do to qualify to get into that program?
There is some criteria. Again, hopefully by the end of this week, I'll have the website posted, and all of the information will be listed there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We will make sure to share that with all of our students and our green clubs especially. Okay. All right. Well, it looks like if no one else has any other questions, it looks like we are at the end of our time. Thank you, everyone, for participating today. Thank you so much, Michael.